Welcome, folks, to the 22nd of May, 2024 Aries Working Group call. We have some cool stuff, including our mediator reconfig conversation from last time to revisit, and of course the other issues that we didn't actually get to on the agenda last time because of that conversation, which was excellent. So that's good. This is a Hyperledger call, so the antitrust policy and the code of conduct are in effect. Links in the agenda. Link to the agenda can be found in the chat or on the Hyperledger wiki under the Aries Working Group meetings. You're welcome to add anything that's useful to the community to that agenda. It's on the wiki, so you can do that. And don't freak out if it doesn't show up here live, because they don't have the live editing, I think, still turned on, and so that's okay. Any new folks want to introduce themselves or announcements we should have on the list but don't? One thing I will mention is EIC, the European Identity Conference, is in 2 weeks. So not next Wednesday, the 29th, but Wednesday, the 5th. And I know both Stephen and I will be there. And we're the two that normally run these calls. And so unless there's someone that's excited enough to run the call that they want to run it, then we're going to have to cancel in 2 weeks, just because of that overlap in the conference there. All right, does anyone want to share any release status or work updates? I know lots of stuff is going on, but there's folks missing. Cool. Okay, so discussion topics. We have a lot. We won't get to them all today, and that's okay. I wanted to revisit the mediator config, talk about the unqualified DIDs, including a PR to update stuff, and then the out of band I think has a PR as well, unless we already handled that. But we'll talk about the unqualified DIDs and the out of band community coordinated update. And then the last topic that I think we might get to is the VDR proxy. This is Stephen created, but isn't here, and so I'll present sort of by proxy for him on that topic to proceed. Any adjustments we want to make, stuff we want to talk about first, change the order, whatever, to the agenda before we get going?
I just wanted to go ahead and mention real quick in regards to the DIDCOM v2 adoption in Akapai. A PR was made yesterday, so it hasn't actually been recorded in the other call yet, but a PR was made for initial support. And by initial support, I mean we send a message via DIDCOM v2, Akapai responds back with a problem report, also done through DIDCOM v2. But that is progress that leads to the next stuff.
That's like someone saying, like, to me, like, do you speak a foreign language? In a foreign language, and me saying no in the foreign language. It's like, anyway, but yes, I love that.
Exactly, but it's like you can speak that foreign language, right?
Yeah,
At all.
and enough to say no. So
Exactly.
right. So that's very cool. Nice. That's kind of both a progress update and a did come v2, so we get double mileage out of that one. Okay, so last week we talked about. Sorry, I've got a frog in my throat. We talked about the mediator reconfiguration issue, in the sense that the coordinate mediation has the ability to provide a routing DID when you first set up mediation, but there's not a method in the protocol to actually update or change that routing DID, which means that it creates a little bit of a bind where the mediator may need to update that for infrastructure or other reasons, and there's not really a way except sort of tearing down and setting up all of the new mediation relationships again to update what that configuration is. And so we talked about this last week. Did anyone have any additional thoughts, or was anyone able to have the time to make some progress on that? James, your hand is up.
Did not make progress, but I had additional thoughts. Um, from last week, we had we were talking about, was trying to look up the notes on this. The thought was to add, I think it was three additional messages um, to the protocol to one say, hey, we're gonna one to change the uh, one to indicate to the mediatee, the person that's going to the holder that's going to use the mediator, hey, I am updating my keys. You should reflect that. And then you had proposed two additional ones of acknowledging it and then following up and saying, hey, I'm done with making this update. And I think the follow-up of, hey, I've completed this with all my dids. I'm not sure actually if we need it, in that if we adjust it so that we do a uh, uh, we might be able to add a field to the key list, the key list update, um, to indicate which did it's for, uh, or the mediator could also just track to figure out however many dids have not been done for a given connection. So like I don't know if that's one where that we need a whole separate message for. Um, thoughts?
Um, a key list update will only actually be required if you're using pure DIDs. If you're using or static DIDs, I should say, that cannot be updated. If
Uh,
you're using a DID method that's capable of producing an updated DID document and passing it to the other party, then
the
you're not
mediator won't
necessarily
know.
the mediator won't actually know, but it's still communicated to the other party. So I think that leaning on the key list might be an overfit to pure DIDs. It's convenient for the use of pure DIDs, but not necessarily. In practice, I think it's going to be common, but from an architectural perspective, I worry about leaning on that too much, just because of how like tightly coupled that is with pure DIDs or any static DIDs. I should really say it's not just pure
Well,
DIDs.
and right now the pure dids is most commonly used in didcom v2 rather than didcom v1, where did keys are the primary did that's in those key list updates.
Right. So it's technically possible in DIDCOM v1 to use the same key, but just with an updated DID document, because that's how you're passing it. Or you're passing a whole nother
Ah,
did, but you could still technically use the same key, I think, as part of it, as part of the did peer, but incorporating the key. So that's a good point. The updated downstream is more or less like a courtesy, saying like, "Hey, I've done this," and it doesn't. I think James, you bring up some good points in that like this could be monitored ish from the other side. You mentioned like, "Hey, here's the new keys for the key list update," but that's really hard to correlate, and I'm not sure we actually want to trust the mediator with the knowledge of which keys became which keys in
mm,
the sense
yeah.
that like they could use to kind of keep track of which ones have been updated, but I think you effectively get the same thing by the party saying like, "Hey, I've told all of my people." The other advantage there is that like every time you move, you throw some stuff away because you're like, "Why did I keep that?" Or I haven't opened that box since the last time that I moved. Um, like when you're changing houses, like this is kind of like that from a DIDCOM perspective. It's if the mediator comes to me and they're like, "Hey, I've got a new, routing DID." It's possible that I'm like, "Yeah, uh, like I'm not going to tell everyone because I don't necessarily want to hear from anyone anymore. This is a good time to change my phone number and just not tell anybody." And so there is the possibility that in a reasonable one, that you're not going to tell everyone just because you don't actually want to receive the messages from those parties anymore anyway. So if I still just say, hey, I've updated all of my downstream, and that's probably the wrong term, I've updated all of my contacts with the new information that that need to know, that isn't necessarily a one-to-one with the actual people that knew previously.
Right. Well, also if the downstream contact wants to uh, prune old connections that don't end up responding, for instance, then there may also be a slew of removed keys from the key list for that given holder.
Yeah. Yes. Um, yeah. So the other thought I had, this is a little disconnected from yours, James, but the other thought I had is that if you have a mediator, you may not want to send that updated config message to all of your people simultaneously, in the sense that if you send one out, it's likely going to cause a flurry of keylist updates one way or the other, removals or new ones. And so you may want to, as a mediator, space those out because that way you're otherwise you're sort of inviting it's like a self-inflicted DDoS attack where you send keyless updates out to the updated config out to everyone, and then everyone gets busy trying to notify and everything else, and you just like invited hail, right? Um, and so it might be worth a note in there being like, hey, you can
DDoS
strategically,
yourself.
yeah, you can space these out a little bit so that you don't then deal with the resulting headache of everyone trying to update this simultaneously. And that might actually be worth a note. Um, um, and it's not a requirement; it's just an implementation note. Like maybe don't do this to yourself. Now it depends. If you've got a hugely capable system and you can just handle it, then you just do it, right? But like if you don't, then maybe maybe trying to spread them out a little bit might be a good idea.
Another interesting thought here, Sam, is this, I think, as mentioned by Colton last week, so this is only applicable to static DIDs that the mediator is using. So if they're using a pure DID for the routing DID, for instance, it's only applicable in that case. Do you think it might be, would it be wise to, rather than actually have a way for the mediator, build the infrastructure and all of the agents to rotate the mediator's DID, encourage the usage of only having static DIDs for the mediator?
Well, and in regards to static DIDs, there are still some DID methods that are in progress, such as I believe it was DID TDW, which is great work. It's an extension upon DID web, but that DID in and of itself has sort of like a serial number in it. And if you need to, for whatever reason, file corruption or whatever, you need to recreate that DID or rotate the DID document because it stores the transactions there. You would still need to rotate the DID, and that puts that kind of DID in a semi-permanent, but not a permanent or semi-static state.
So to your point, James, you identified the most common cases, like if you've got a static DID or something and you need to change that, but this actually has utility beyond that and maybe slightly less frequent cases, but still very real. Let's say I did TDW, it's done and whatever, I've been using it, and then for some reason I have to like change something about the infrastructure that I have it hosted on. This would be terrible, but imagine I lost control of the domain, and so I need to change the domain. If as long as I'm capable of messaging that to the other parties that I have, then they don't have to sort of reset up everything that's happening. Or maybe for strategy, maybe I use did web initially, but then I'm like, ooh, TDW is better for lots of reasons. I should migrate to that. This still allows the mediator to switch the routing did that they are using in a really important and useful way. So I don't think this is purely a static did problem, even though that's what you might see it. It might be common for it to be a static did problem, but it's not universally a static did problem. Does that make sense, or did I misunderstand your statement there?
No, I think that makes sense. I just want to not introduce a bunch of more work and infrastructure if we don't need it.
Amen. And we definitely need a good, which is why I realized our discussion last week started out with like, how do you solve this problem? And then I realized we by protocol design had restricted the mediator to ever update its routing did. Right? Like that was just
Yeah.
a gap in the protocol, and I'm like, oh, that's something we should probably fix, right? And so,
Everyone can update their or everyone can update their did except the mediator.
right. So you shall not rotate, right? And so that was the gap that I recognized and that I think we need to fix. The fact that it happens to happen and affect this other stuff is a little bit more of a side effect in the sense that I think if we'd done this originally, then we would not be running into this problem. And so I think it's an oversight in the protocol design that imposes some rigidity on the part of the mediator that I don't like architecturally speaking. So yeah, I think that's certainly part of it. But there's some really
That
good discussion.
makes a lot
So
of sense.
yeah, cool. I should probably try and organize my notes slightly better. Um, Other thoughts, topics around mediator reconfig? Sebastis, yeah.
Um, it's related to the mediator, but slightly different based on what I had mentioned in the last week's call. So let me make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So this is applicable, this whole scenario is applicable when there is a mobile wallet connected to a cloud wallet, correct?
I don't know that I understand what you're saying yet.
So it's only when the mediator is in the middle, right? Which is, am I understanding this correctly, that this use case is when there is a mobile wallet which is connecting with a cloud wallet?
Yes, but I'd expand it to say that any agent that uses a mediator for inbound messages, because it may not be mobile, it
Okay,
may just be behind a firewall.
sure.
Yeah.
Okay,
So this is a problem. So any
right,
agent that uses a mediator for inbound messages and the mediator needs to change something about its infrastructure and update its routing did. That's really where this applies.
right. Okay. So if I've the way I've deployed my architecture, I'm using the mediator for, okay. Um, the the reason why I was saying the mobile one, I'll go back to what I had brought up last time, which you had mentioned we'll cover later, or is a different problem statement. If the mediator is completely down and the data is lost, um, if it is, I'm trying to think how will and I'm going to focus only on the mobile use case, um, because there's no call home, there's nothing, the mobile has just been downloaded, I have a bunch of connections, I have a bunch of hopefully some relationships or connections I've established. Now none of them are valid anymore and they can't get to me. How would somebody recover or even come to know that, hey, this is all kind of lost? Do you understand what I'm trying to highlight?
Yes. So if your mediator like loses data and no one's calling you anymore and you're like, does no one like me? Like, why am I not getting inbound messages? And it's hard to detect.
And I can't even reach the other part. So I can't reach, I don't know why that's happening. I
Well,
don't know.
the,
I don't know their endpoint because I'm a mobile. Uh, I did not save their dids or whatever, right? Because it was all um, something like that. I'm just thinking, if I'm not able to know how to reach them and they can't reach me, how do I
well,
recover from that situation?
so one of them is that if you your mediator only impacts messages traveling to you.
Correct.
So
Correct.
if unless they happen to use the same mediator, which may happen in a smaller ecosystem, but if they're using a different mediator, then a loss of data on yours doesn't affect a loss on theirs, which means that you're still capable of sending messages to them. You just can't receive messages
Right,
from
right,
them unless it's been
right,
fixed.
right,
Right? So
right,
it's only the interruption of inbound. That's not a solution. I just wanted to like
right,
make the
right.
problem more clear. Um, so I believe in the protocol, the coordinate mediation, there's a way to ask for. Um, I believe there's a way to ask for the keys that they have, or is that not the case? So here's a grant recipient update. So it's possible to ask the mediator, here you go, for the keys or for the DIDs that are configured. And so you would keep track, of course, of the DIDs that the mediator should know about, because if you only have one mediator, it's like all the DIDs that you have. Um, and if you asked the mediator and you queried the DIDs, then they would not be able to, then they would return more or less an empty list, or certainly a list that was missing the DID that you expected. And so if you page through here and they did not say, hey, here's a recipient DID that I have configured, then that is definitely something that you would know. Um, right now, there isn't a way to ask about a specific DID. There's just the please retrieve the list of all DIDs that you are receiving for me. And so that is a way that you could discover simply by querying that, but that's probably not something that you want to do all the time, just because there could be a lot of these, and that would be tedious. But if you had a scenario where you're like, I'm not getting messages, I'm curious if this is still a configured DID, then asking the mediator to return the list of recipient DIDs that has configured would be a way of you discovering that the mediator had lost that data.
So, okay, I can. So I'll go back to that mediator and ask if it's lost, then ask them to reestablish connection with me, or like.
Yeah. So if they've lost the DIDs that you've
Mm,
configured, then of course you can do a a keyless, a recipient update. It used to be called keyless update in DID v2, but it's recipient because it's using DIDs now. Which means that you can say, hey, here's a recipient update and here's a new one. You didn't have this, I'm adding it again. You knew this and you lost it. And so you could reconfigure that. Obviously, if this happened a lot, you'd want to find yourself a different mediator.
no, obviously, fair enough. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I'm really thinking this, especially in light of all these ransomware stories that are popping up everywhere where they take over the database, right? And
Right.
so if something like that happens for a specific mediator, how do I reestablish the connection?
So there's two possible outcomes of this, right? One of them is that you just need to move away from the mediator immediately, even if
Yeah.
even if there were. And in that case, you would set up a new mediator. You would coordinate with a new mediator and set up those relationships, and then you'd message the relationships with the DID rotation and saying, hey, I've rotated to a new DID. That new DID would include the new mediator information, and then you're done.
Mhm.
And so that's the rotate DID feature in DIDCOM v2. That's what that gets you, is the ability to tell other parties like, hey, I'm using a different one now. It's still me. Here's proof it's still me, but like I'm over here now. And that would be something you could do. If for some reason you wanted to stay at the current mediator, then you could detect that that they didn't have some recipients configured for you, and then reconfigure those recipients.
Okay. It'd be nice to document these best practices.
It would be great. A good place for that is the DIDCOM book, and add pieces around mediation and discussions of what to do in specific circumstances, etc. And good advice on how to handle that, I think, in the mediation section would be useful.
Yeah, because it's I don't know if I can say this, but it's based on what I'm learning through this week and last week conversation. It is a point of weakness in the architecture, really only from the point of view of the vulnerability that it creates. Because
To use mediators itself, you mean?
well, I can keep my mobile wallet safe, and even if it gets attacked, it's getting attacked at one place, unless you can attack many mobiles at the same time, which probably highly improbable. But the mediator is a place, I'm just saying, can be attacked and data can be taken or crashed or whatever, or things changed, which can bring part of the ecosystem down, if I can say it like that.
Yeah, it could disrupt it for sure,
Yeah.
because of that. So it's worth noting that at no point in the disruption does the mediator get to view the contents of the messages.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Right, but I bring it up just in case someone was confused about that. I don't think you are. But it is one of the things that, and this is a little bit of an advanced topic of mediation. There's no reason why a mobile agent should only use one mediator. You need one, but you can actually use more than one. And again, you're about to say it'd be great if this was documented somewhere, and it should be in the book. But one of the strategies that you can use to make that more robust is that you can actually have as many mediators as you want configured. You can pick up messages from those mediators, and you can spread them out. You can even have the same key configured at multiple mediators, so that and so that you can tell them that. In fact, in your DID document, you could include multiple endpoints that someone could communicate with you, and each of those endpoints can use a separate mediator. And that way, if a message is failing to go through and to transmit, they can fall back to another one and use a different route. In which case you don't have a single point of failure in any particular relationship. You can have multiples. So the architecture allows it, but doesn't require that. And there isn't very necessarily a ton of understanding in the community about how to leverage that or how to do that if you desire.
Your last point being most valid, and how to move, if I can say, we are focused on making things more decentralized to reduce a single point of attack.
Mm-hmm.
And so hence I'm thinking about the best practice is that if you're doing a POC, if you're doing demos, it's okay. But if you're thinking about a production system, this is how it needs to be set up so that it's not centralized, there's no single point of attack, and so on and so forth.
Right. Yes. And that would be a fantastic topic for the book. That would be a great one. Yes. If I could just figure out how to get all the other stuff done in my life so that I could spend time updating the book, that would be awesome.
And it'll be a good one, really, for even the clients who are using the system to understand how it's different than a federated or a centralized system.
Yeah. Yes.
Right, like for Amazon can be down and then it's down, right? But here, what you've described is if you have like a more decentralized, the system is already decentralized, but if somebody goes deeper into understanding the mediation part, they can say, hey, it's not really, because it's dependent upon how you've deployed the mediators.
We can, although I need to talk about, certainly you can make it more robust. There's this discussion about what decentralized really means, right? And in this case, I think mediators already qualify in the sense that even if I only use one mediator for my application, the fact that each recipient can set up and use whatever mediator they want without permission and without registering it anywhere, I think already qualifies in my book for decentralization. It's in the sense that it's how messages get to me, which means there is a single point of failure, but it's not centralized. It's
Correct.
just it's just isn't as robust as it could be.
Well,
And so
Technically speaking, there's a single point of failure anyways, because whether you're using a mediator or not, if you have a mobile phone and something happens to that phone, you drop it, phone screen cracks or whatever, gets run over by a train, you've lost it anyways. That single point has failed.
well, that single point. Well, the other thing that we haven't got to your point, Colton, is that ideally we have situations with either backups that facilitate recovery or multiple devices. Maybe I have my laptop and my phone that actually has this information together so that one can be used to restore the other one as part of that process. We haven't really got there yet in the sense that most of us are focusing on mobile apps as sort of the one app that you use, but the architecture doesn't need that. It's just that we've mostly been focusing on that from a practicality perspective in the development of the technology. But I would love that future, and the architecture already supports it. You can have multiple keys in your DID document, one for each of the devices that you actually have, and then when messages actually get sent, they can get sent to each of those simultaneously. Now that opens up a whole other set of conversations that we're probably not ready for, which is how you actually coordinate between the various agents that you have inside of your what Daniel Hartman has called your domain. But the architecture is ready for that. We just haven't actually pushed that forward because we're mostly just busy trying to deploy the technology at the level that we're currently working at. But yes, certainly.
I'm just going to mention one thing, Sam. At some point, if we can, besides having conversations about technology and RFCs and all of that, if we can have a section or a week every 2 months or whatever works on really good practices or best practices around Aries, would be really helpful.
Actually, that's an excellent suggestion because I was trying to figure out how we actually get these things down. And if we actually had a best practice around some topic conversation, then we can collaboratively combine those notes together. And then that becomes a really good place, thing to stick into our resources, and we just sort of collaboratively create that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great idea. Um,
Though it was mentioned as more of part of Aries, but I think that belongs more alongside the DIDCOM user group. And the reason why is because of the fact that DIDCOM itself is what we're talking about, the DIDCOM protocol, and we're talking about the best practices in use there. And Aries is just one user of the DIDCOM protocol.
Well, I didn't read it as just EdCom. What I read as Sebastian's comment is that we should do this for all the areas of the technology, not just EdCom. So we should totally
I
do
see.
best practices in DedCom around various topics, but there's also best practices with wallets or with key management, with other stuff that isn't DedCom related at all, but is related to Aries. And that's actually a really great idea to just have those best practices conversations. Because one, everyone's going to learn a lot in the conversation. And two, it provides excellent fodder to put in the documentation or other guides or resources for it. So I'm a fan of doing both. So maybe I extended that further than you had intended, but in your original comment. But no, I think that's an excellent suggestion. Yeah, that's very good. Nice. Okay, other comments, questions? This has been a very valuable conversation for me. Okay. Let's talk about unqualified DIDs. I have some. It's going to take me a second. This is the rendered version. There are pull requests. This is the one that I'm talking about now, I think. This is the unqualified DIDs. This is a pull request for dates. Oh, James wants me to spell it correctly. Gosh. Yeah, thanks for that, James. So, so yes. So Krita supports did for, so we're ready to move to the next step, which is that deployment step that we've talked about. So that's excellent. Is anyone opposed to merging this? We've got a yes by Timo and James. Is anyone opposed to merging this, the updated dates, specifically? We're backdating here. We're backdating the code update to say it's already been done, and then we're updating the deployment date to deploy the code that's been updated. This is for both Akapai and for any other software, including Credo, that's involved there. All right. Four, 05, 22. So I'm going to merge that, which is excellent. And so now that that's done, we now have a month and a half between our target deployment dates. So within your various teams and groups, please try and focus on deployment. Obviously, that date needs to adjust if we're not capable of moving that fast as a community. But the faster we can get that deployed, the better from that perspective. So excellent. Okay, the other one that I wanted to bring up, and this is a pull request, and I can blame James for this because the out of band transition got got stalled a long time ago. Part of it was because of the misnaming. I've actually updated the title here. This was originally the out of band and did exchange protocols, but really what we ended up reducing this to was just transitioning to out of band, because the transition to did exchange can then happen more naturally because of that. So there's a handful of small updates here. One is that I renamed this in order to remove the did exchange from the title. And then I updated the status to indicate that all systems are using out of band, and the target completion date for this is also in a month and a half. And then I also updated the static peer DIDs RFC has been retired, because at the time we didn't have the peer DID specification the same way, so I just updated the reference to the peer DID specification. But that's more of a clarification than an actual change. I saw, James, that this should be, hang on, what did you say? You said something intelligent. It was about
it should go to adopted based off of
step 2. Yeah.
He says it should move to which one that you're moving towards, I believe.
So, are you saying that this should be adopted now or adopted the next time?
I believe adopted now.
Okay, so I should update that.
The other note that I noticed during this was that if you want to remove did exchange, you should probably also remove it from line 31.
Line 31, yeah. Okay. Excuse me. I will make those changes before we merge this, just for clarity, because that's an oversight that we should fix. So excellent. I will. That's good. Any other comments on this? It'd be nice to get this nailed down and just done. It kind of stalled, and it was up to. It stalled in the sense that code was being updated, but we weren't paying any attention to the transition. So having this actually done and like sticking it in the done pile will be really nice. I do know there's been some isolated use of still the connections protocol invitations, and so having that go away would be really nice. Cool. Any other comments about the community coordinated updates?
Are we just? I'm curious on the Akapai front. Are we defaulting to creating out of band invitations, or does that question even make sense, or is that something where we're still defaulting to connections invitations?
That's a good question that I don't know the answer to off the top of my head. Does anyone here have answers on the default behavior of Akapai? Yeah, I don't know that we have the right folks in the room to answer that specific question, but it's a good one. But that's part of it is that we should be switching the defaults to make that happen in this phase. So that is good. Okay, next on the list is the VDR proxy. This is a proposed protocol for proxying verifiable data registry requests. So he's got some commentary in here, but one of the reasons this happened was that they had an experience where they were deploying a mobile client into a corporate environment, and the corporate environment blocked the firewalls necessary to talk to the ledger, which was really unhelpful when it's trying to load ledger assets in order to do part of the work that the mobile app needs to do. And so this VDR proxy protocol allows an agent to be used as a proxy, a trusted agent to be used as a proxy over DIDCOM, in the sense that as long as you can exchange DIDCOM messages, you're capable of using this protocol, and you can use this instead of direct ledger access in order to avoid that problem. And I believe this has been designed in a way that's relatively generic, in the sense that it doesn't only have to be used with a single ledger, but can support a variety of ledgers in order to make that happen. And so here's the messages that he has. Here's a request message where you have a list of IDs and URIs. The list is convenient because if you need to load, 4 or 5 different things, you can just do it in parallel rather than doing it independently. And so the ID is just used within the request and the response. The URI is the asset to respond there. And then a response comes back with the actual data of the element that you're trying to request. And so that's kind of how this is designed. Then there's problem reports. One of the things looking at this is that it's maybe not necessarily obvious which VDRs the proxy is capable of resolving. And so I don't know if that's a problem or not, but I may leave that comment here just to kind of keep track of it. One of the so here's note of the firewalls and blocking access to that. One of the useful bits about this may be an efficiency perspective in the sense that whoever's running this protocol can, and this is not expected that everyone will. This is expected that like a specific server would. But whoever's running this could actually cache those ledger assets for speed reasons, and then be able to return them to folks asking. So if you had an ecosystem where this proxy was in use, they're likely going to be requesting similar assets, and you would be able to return a really rapid response there, which carries a nice advantage. The ability to do this is very powerful. It's been suggested that if you are running a mediator in your ecosystem, that this might be a nice protocol to have the mediator run, not because it has anything to do with mediation at all, because it doesn't, but simply because it's another, agent that you're running to support the ecosystem. If you have a mediator agent running, and you give it the ability to run the VDR proxy, then you might be able to, solve 2 problems with one agent. And that would be convenient. But it's worth noting that that's only they have nothing to mediation and the VDR proxy have nothing to do with each other, except for the fact that they're both really useful things for an ecosystem to have. But that would be a convenient way of doing this without deploying sort of yet another agent in order to solve this. You could add these capabilities to a mediator, and that would be fine. It would not interfere with mediation in any way. Yeah, any questions about this? James.
Uh, discussion in the conversation, but one of my questions is, I got distracted by myself. The one of the things is I was thinking about too, previous to the mediator discussion, you may want to actually have it be not on the mediator as a separate deployed agent, because it could potentially allow for more correlation of what the individual holders are doing. Where if you have a separate agent which has a separate connection to that, even if the mediator is hosted by the same, or the agent that's hosting the VDR proxy here is the same that hosts the mediator, you can't correlate between the two different connections as effectively. So you may specifically actually want to have it be separate agents.
You could, and that's not a bad consideration. In a lot of the early smaller ecosystems that we have, like all the people in the ecosystem are doing all the things anyway. And so
Yeah.
there's not really a risk of correlation. But if there is a situation where you may not want to expose that correlation, then I think your advice is really good.
My other question, which I remembered, was in regards to caching of resources. Is that something that should be defined by the server, or is that something that could be passed from the holder to the server that indicates, hey, this is like for revocation. I need to know now if it's changed. I don't want any cached, or I'm okay with something in the last day, for instance, if it's less urgent, rather than being server configured.
So pass a tolerance for cached items.
Yeah.
We should definitely bring that up in the conversation for this RFC. I It could be something left to a future version. It could be something that's worth including now if caching is anticipated to be done, more immediately.
Cool. I'll add a comment to that effect then.
Yeah, that would be really useful actually, because it's a great great observation. So yes, and I need to respond to this. There's a lot of push to use like DIDCOM RPC rather than just use this as a native DIDCOM protocol. And I said I would write some stuff about this, and I haven't. I think we do ourselves a disservice if we're trying to use RPC over DIDCOM in a way that we're not simply bridging to an existing RPC thing, but rather creating a new RPC thing to run across DIDCOM, simply because we lose the other types of discoverable advantages of DIDCOM itself. We have discover features, and that is a great way to discover that another party supports something like this. And when it's buried inside of gRPC, you have to do a second level discover features to do that, which is possible, but not necessarily ideal. And so tunneling stuff over DIDCOM, I think, does have some value, but I think that tunneling for the sake of tunneling, I think is a bad idea, in the sense that I think it introduces anti-patterns for access that I think should probably be avoided. But I haven't written anything about that. This is another best practices thing where I think having some conversation and collaboratively creating some notes that end up in best practices would be something good, to credit Subhasis again with his excellent idea. So yes. Cool. We are nearly out of time, but I'm glad we could review this. I like the fact that this is a protocol. I think it's a good one. I think it helps solve some issues that have been annoying, but also does it generically enough. James, you asked whether this should be specific to Indy or not, and I don't know that I have an answer there, but I definitely want to sort of read the commentary here and maybe respond to that. In the sense, I like that it might be able to resolve other resources, and there may be some privacy benefits in doing so, because it's being pulled from a central agent rather than all the individual agents, which could provide some privacy features for some requested assets. So anyway,
I definitely agree. Like I thing from my perspective is that I think it needs to be explicit. The RFC as presently written is too open-ended of like I don't actually know what I should expect to get back from the proxy in regards to XYZ uh VDR.
right. Yep. Cool. Cool. Anyway, please go add commentary to this RFC, and that way I anticipate when Steven's back off of his vacation that he will be very interested in moving this forward and getting it official. So very cool. Any other comments or stuff today? We didn't get through all of our stuff, and I didn't think we would, but we made really good progress and had great conversation. Any final notes before we break for the week? And yes, Colton, I would like a time machine, or maybe I wouldn't. Maybe that would open up more problems than it would solve. But anyway, more time would always be nice.
Just need to pause time is what we need to do.
Pause time for everyone else but you.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Cool. All right, folks. Thanks for coming. Have a great week. Grateful for you being here and all of your input, and we will we'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Talk to you later.